Hello, my name is Nicola Shongwe. Welcome to this first lesson on narrative writing. In this series, we'll be looking at what narrative writing is and how to write a good narrative essay. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define narrative writing and identify and use different points of view. Narrative writing involves telling a story. You may be recounting an event that actually happened, or you may be creating a story from your imagination. Narrative writing is quite similar to descriptive writing in that people, places, events, and emotions are described. Narrative writing is meant to entertain. Part of being human is getting to tell great stories. We all see the same event from different perspectives or life experiences. How a story is told and what sort of information is included or excluded depends on who is telling the story. For example, imagine that a fight breaks out in the schoolyard. If the principal had to ask the two people involved in the fight what had happened, he would probably get two very different accounts. Each one would try to make out that the fight was caused by the other. A teacher who witnessed the fight would have yet another version, but her version would probably be closer to the truth, since she would have no interest in distorting the truth. Authors and writers carefully choose how they are going to tell their story, because how they tell it influences how we, the readers, understand it. The point of view or voice chosen by the author will influence how characters and events are introduced. Voice refers to who is telling the story. There are three voices available to use. They are first person, second person, and third person. First person voice is used when events are described as if the author were part of them. You can tell that first person voice is being used when you see the words I, we, me, and so on. So let's look at an example. I went to Durban. We had fun. Or, my family lives in Tzaneen. Let's take a look now at the story of Cinderella as Cinderella herself would tell it. In other words, in the first person. My stepmother and stepsisters were lazy, mean, and spiteful women who made me do all the chores around the house. From morning to night, I scrubbed the floors, tidied the house, cooked the meals, and washed the pots. Let's identify the features in this text that show that it was written in the first person. Notice the pronouns I and my, which show that Cinderella was speaking from her own point of view. In other words, she was using the first person. We've identified this as an example of using the first person voice. But now let's look at how seeing the story from Cinderella's point of view makes it much more interesting. By describing the other people as lazy, mean, and spiteful, while Cinderella describes herself as working like a slave, Cinderella is able to portray herself in a very positive light, whereas people she doesn't like are portrayed in a very negative light. So whenever you see that a narrative piece is written in the first person, consider what the writer's intentions are, and also be on the lookout for bias or distortion of facts. Sometimes, although the piece is written in the first person, the I is not the author themselves, but a character that the author has created to tell the story. This person is called the narrator or storyteller. The narrator or storyteller is the person who is telling the story. So although the author is not talking about personal experiences, the script is still written in the first person because the narrator is describing things from his or her own point of view. The second type of voice that we are going to look at is the third person. This is when events are told from the perspective of an outside observer. You can tell when a narrative is told from the third person voice when you see the non-inclusive pronouns he, she, they, and so on. For example, he drove like a maniac. They had not seen the film. It was clear that she was in love with him. Let's take another look at the story of Cinderella, only this time, instead of seeing it from Cinderella's point of view, we'll see it from the point of view of an outside observer who does not take part in the action at all. In other words, it is written in the third person. Many years ago, a young girl called Cinderella lived with her stepmother and stepsisters. She did various chores around the house. Let's see which words in this passage indicate that it was written in the third person. Her indicates that the home is Cinderella's and not the home of the narrator as well. She is also used to describe what Cinderella does. Let's consider the implication of using this type of narration to tell the story. Whilst this version of the story is less biased than the version told by Cinderella herself, third-person narration tends to be impersonal and less interesting. Third-person voice is also used in indirect or reported speech. The narrator in this type of writing is sometimes known as the omniscient narrator. An omniscient narrator knows everything that has happened but does not participate in the action. Right, we've had a look at first-person and third-person narration, and now I'm sure you're wondering what happened to second-person. Second-person voice is a directed or command-style voice. You will often hear the pronouns you and your, and it's often used in instructions or directions. For example, you should go to the disco. Take a left turn at the robot. Second-person voice is generally used in direct speech and therefore not normally used in narrative essays, so we won't discuss it much further. In this lesson, we have discussed what a narrative story is. That is, it is a piece of writing that tells a story or describes events. We've also looked at the three different narrative voices that are available. We have the first person, in which the storyteller is part of the action. The second person, which is a direct or command style of voice. And the third person, which is when events are described by an outside observer, sometimes an omniscient narrator. I hope that this lesson will help you not only to identify who is telling the story, but also to make you more aware of how stories can be manipulated to make them more subjective or objective, depending on who is telling the story. It's now time for your task. In this lesson, we looked at different ways in which the story of Cinderella could be told. Have a look now at this version and see if you can answer these questions. Many years ago, my friends had a stepsister called Cinderella. She was a badly dressed, disobedient and sulky child, and to try and make her mend her lazy ways, my friends made her help with the household chores. What voice has been used? Who do you think is narrating the story? You must be able to provide reasons for your answers. Well, that's the end of this lesson. Thank you for joining us and see you next time.